He was the voice of a generation, a man whose songs have been played millions of times around the world. Living on a Prayer, Always, It's My Life. Hits that became anthems for millions. His concerts packed stadiums. His voice sent chills down your spine. But what if I told you that that voice is under threat right now? That Jon Bon Jovi may never sing the way he used to.
Not depressing as much as soul-searching, as much as, you had to sort of say, God forbid it's over, it's been incredible, and then, you put your faith in the God above and you say, let's work on this every day. And what you see in the doc happened 1 and 2 years ago now. So I'm well on the road to recovery.
Yeah.
I did Idol the other night. That's a little bit of pressure, you know, and I went out there and knocked it out. It's okay.
In recent years, fans have begun to notice something is wrong. His voice sounds different, he avoids high notes, and sometimes it even seems like it hurts to sing. Some wrote it off to age, others to fatigue. But the truth was much worse. Doctors have diagnosed a diagnosis that gives you goosebumps, vocal atrophy. It's not just a temporary loss of voice, not ordinary fatigue. It's a process that can destroy the very essence of a singer. But how did it happen? What was the trigger? And most importantly, will the rock legend be able to return to the stage?
It was all good, but the initial reaction was a shock.
Yeah.
Because of the change.
Yeah.
And so you have to get over that, and the healing wasn't done yet, that's all.
Jon Bon Jovi is not just a rock star, but a man who has gone through many trials. As a young man, he scrubbed floors in the studio, hoping that one day his voice would be heard. He achieved fame at the cost of sleepless nights, grueling touring, and fighting his own fears. His songs inspired millions, but few knew the cost of that fame. In the early 90s, he was on the brink: emotional burnout, industry pressures, loneliness. At one point, he even thought the worst, rushing down a highway in California. But then he was able to pull himself together. Then, but not now.
We have a new album that's coming out in June. I had no issues singing it. The successful surgery happened. Now it's all a part of the rehabilitation of a vocal cord. You got to remember that your vocal cords are as big as your thumbnail. They're this big, and it's out of your control, really.
The situation repeated itself decades later. The year is 2022. Another concert. Thousands of fans, the spotlight, the roar of the crowd. Jon goes on stage, takes the microphone, and realizes something is wrong. His voice is not responding. The notes that sounded easy before are now difficult. He tries to hide it, continues to perform, but then the irreparable happens. The video of the concert goes viral, and thousands of people write, Bon Jovi is no longer the same. And then, a medical examination and a terrible verdict: his voice is destroyed. But is it over? Jon Bon Jovi never gave up. He decides to fight, agrees to a complex operation, begins the long road to recovery. He is supported by family, friends, and even colleagues who have been through something similar.
Everything along the way is what got me to where I am today.
Yeah. Could you see him coming back? Could you do some stuff
There's
together?
always an opportunity. He knows 3/4 of the songs. but it's not that I'm looking for that, or he's looking for that, or anybody's looking for that.
It'd be a wonderful reunion, though, for you guys and for the fans as well, of course.
In this video, we will tell you how Jon Bon Jovi found himself on the brink, how he overcomes the hardest challenge of his life, and whether he will be able to get back on stage and make millions of voices sing along to him. His story is one of struggles, downfalls, and triumph. A story that proves a true legend does not give up. Jon Bon Jovi has always seemed like a man who obeys fate itself. His path in music is a story of incredible perseverance, talent, and the ability to overcome difficulties that for others could be an insurmountable wall. From childhood, he dreamed of the stage, of millions of people singing along to his songs, and despite all the obstacles, he achieved his goal. But few people know that the road to fame was paved with pain, disappointments, and desperate struggle for a place in the sun. Born into a simple family in New Jersey, Jon grew up in an atmosphere of discipline and hard work. His parents, both former Marines, instilled resilience in him, but they didn't quite share his dreams of music. His father hoped that his son would follow in his footsteps and choose a more real profession. But Jon knew from childhood that his heart belongs to the stage. In his school years, he participated in all musical competitions, sang in the church choir, and at the age of 13, he received his first guitar, a gift that turned his life upside down. From that moment on, music became not just a hobby, but the meaning of existence.
He was very excited.
was-
There was a lot of caffeine in that system. I was bouncing off the walls before I got onto the stage, yeah.
But do you get that feeling back when you watch it? Is it a slight of out-of-body experience, or do you go back
You know,
there and
I think it's the wisdom of having, you know, the experience and looking back on that kid. You've been asked throughout your career, what would you tell the younger you?
Yeah.
The first steps in the industry were full of disappointments. At the age of 16, John, along with a friend, keyboardist David Bryan, formed the band Atlantic City Expressway and began performing in local clubs. They rehearsed nightly, recorded demos on an old tape recorder, and sent them to labels, hoping for some kind of response. But the industry was ruthless. The answers, if they came at all, were always the same. You're not up to the mark, rock is already oversaturated with bands, your style doesn't fit in with modern trends. Once in one of the rejection letters the producer wrote, your vocals are not bad, but there are too many like you. But John was not one to give up. He got a job as a janitor at the Power Station studio in New York, where he worked nights and recorded demos during the day. Every spare minute he had was devoted to music, and sometimes he even slept on the floor of the studio so as not to waste time traveling home. On one of those days, he met a local DJ who, after hearing his Runaway demo, agreed to put it on the air. No one expected the song to become instantly popular. The calls to the radio station never stopped. People asking, who's singing that? Thus began the story of his success.
People see it and they think, you know, it's George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. You know?
It's like pictures of Bigfoot.
It's Bigfoot, yeah. And you know, we do that often.
Do you?
Yeah, we do.
Like about what?
5 times a year, 6 times a year. So every couple months we just go for a few hours.
John then put together a band with some of the best musicians he knew: David Bryan, Alec John Sack, Tico Torres and Richie Sambora. They gave their band the name Bon Jovi and began playing warm-up shows for more famous artists. But success was still a phantom dream. The first tours were a real ordeal. Endless traveling in a crumbling van, sleeping on the floor in rented apartments, concerts in half-empty bars. There were moments when everything seemed pointless. On one trip, they even ran out of money for food and had to subsist on peanut butter sandwiches for a week. But they didn't give up. And when their debut album came out in 1984, although it wasn't an instant hit, it did attract attention. But the real breakthrough came with their third album, Slippery When Wet. You Give Love a Bad Name, Wanted Dead or Alive and Livin' on a Prayer, blew up the charts. Overnight, Bon Jovi became superstars. Their music was on every radio. Their albums sold millions of copies, and concerts drew crowds of thousands. But fame is not only fans and applause, but also a frantic pace of life, constant touring, and industry pressure. They worked without respite, going from one tour to the next. John felt an incredible responsibility to the fans and the musicians. He was not just the frontman, he was the leader, the man on whose shoulders the whole band rested. And that burden was getting heavier and heavier. By the end of the 80s, the exhaustion reached its limit. The tour after the New Jersey album lasted almost 2 years, 232 concerts all over the world, almost without breaks. John was so exhausted that one day, right during a concert, his legs gave out. He literally collapsed on stage, but instead of canceling the show, he forced himself to get up and continued singing. This was a rock star who couldn't afford to be weak.
I have some very strange kinship with Benjamin Franklin. I don't know why, but there's something in my DNA that every time something happens to me with Ben Franklin. And you know your $100 bill?
Yeah.
I own that painting.
Yeah. Oh, yeah?
I own that painting. He sat for the painting.
What?
Yeah. And so there are 3 of them in existence. One is in the National Portrait Gallery, one is...
When did this love start?
So anyhow, I've read too much about this guy. And everything that he's done, from the post office to the volunteer fire department to insurance companies to the jet stream to...
Innovative, yeah.
Without him, there would probably be no America negotiated
How it is
with
right now, yep.
the English.
But something inside him had broken. The constant pressure, the lack of sleep, the overwork, all led him to an emotional crisis. One day, driving back after a concert, he was driving down a quiet highway in California and suddenly realized that he was scared to even think about the next day. The thought of starting all over again tomorrow, recording sessions, flights, new shows, made him so tired that he seriously thought, what if I just hit the gas and hit a jackknife? That night became a point of no return for him. He realized he was either going to make a difference or just burn out. For the first time in years, he paused, sought counseling, and began to rebuild himself. But even after that, he couldn't shake off the obsessive feeling that the fans were demanding more from him than he could give. He wouldn't let himself rest because he was afraid of disappointing the people who believed in him. Decades later, the situation happened again. Only this time it wasn't burnout that became his enemy, but his own body. In 2022, standing on stage, he realized he no longer had control over his voice. He tried to hide it, but thousands of people noticed Jon Bon Jovi no longer sounded like he used to. It was the beginning of the toughest ordeal of his life. When Bon Jovi finally rose to the top of musical Olympus, it was like a fairy tale. Their albums sold millions of copies, stadiums were filled to capacity, and their songs became the soundtracks to the most important moments in fans' lives. But fairy tales tend to turn into challenges, especially when success becomes a never-ending race. For Jon Bon Jovi, that race lasted for decades, until one day he realized he had stopped breathing freely.
Who I had not met for much longer than before this. And my dad dragged him to see the band play. And he said, the band's not very good, but your kid's got something. And he says, you know, if you ever need something, give me a call. So after I graduated high school, I called the guy and I said, hi, can I come to your recording studio and just fetch coffee? And he said yes, hence the frog story years later.
By the early 90s, fatigue had taken its toll on him. Years of constant touring, studio recordings, interviews and industry pressure had done their job, but he couldn't stop. The fans, the labels, the musicians demanded it. He felt that if he gave himself a break, everything would fall apart. And so he kept working, driving himself into a state where music stopped bringing joy, and the stage started to resemble a gladiatorial arena where he was required to perform a new feat every night. Then he coped, found the strength to survive the crisis. But the echoes of that fatigue remained, lurking deep inside, waiting for the moment to strike again. By the mid-2000s, the tension within the band was palpable. Jon had always been the leader, the man who made the decisions, negotiated with the label, took responsibility for all aspects of creativity. But as the years went by, that burden began to be felt more strongly. Richie Sambora, his longtime musical partner, also felt that pressure, but handled it differently. At some point it felt like they were playing different games between them. Jon wanted to move forward, record new albums, get full houses, and Richie wanted to slow down a bit, spend more time with his family. This conflict had been brewing for years. The difference of opinion became more and more obvious, but as long as there was overall success, everything seemed tolerable. However, in 2013, when the band was in the midst of a world tour, Richie simply did not go on stage that night. It came as a shock to everyone. The fans didn't know what was going on. The musicians didn't either. Jon tried to call him, but to no avail. Then he thought something serious had happened, maybe an illness, maybe an accident. But then the news came. Richie had gone home because he couldn't live like that anymore. For Jon, it was a betrayal. They had gone through so many trials together, survived the most difficult years, and now, when there was nothing left to prove, one of the closest people just leaves. In the interview, Jon didn't hide his hurt. He said that he did not expect such a thing, that it was like a stab in the back. Fans of the band were divided. Some supported Richie, saying that he had the right to choose himself, his family, and not endless touring. Others accused him of abandoning the band at the most crucial moment. The hardest thing for Jon was that for the first time he felt his strength, his determination starting to crack. He had always believed that if you wanted to achieve something, just work harder, don't give up, don't leave up. But now he realized that rule wasn't universal. People aren't machines. Everyone has a limit, even himself. After Richie left, he had to rebuild not only the group, but himself as well. He felt that if he didn't change his approach, he risked losing not only his career, but also himself. He started to listen more to his body, to his emotions. But despite his best efforts, he couldn't ignore what was happening to his voice. The first telltale signs appeared back in 2017, but at the time he wrote it off as fatigue. Then it got worse, and by 2022 it was obvious to everyone. He could no longer perform his songs the way he used to. He tried changing arrangements, singing in a different key, but the problem was deeper. The doctors confirmed his vocal cords were weakening. He had vocal atrophy. For a singer, this is scarier than losing money, status, or even a band. His voice is his essence. It's the instrument that made him who he is. And now that tool is failing. He knew there were only two ways, either accept it and walk away, or fight. He chose the second. The surgery, the difficult recovery, the daily exercise, it was hard, but he wasn't going to give up. He had to retrain himself to sing, to find his voice again, to learn to take care of it. He realized that he would never be able to sound the way he did when he was younger, but the most important thing for him was not to lose the music completely. His return to the stage in 2024 was not just a performance, but a statement. He is still here, still struggling, and despite all the adversity he has endured, he continues to do what he loves. His voice may not be what it used to be, but there is something different about it. The wisdom, the depth, the strength of years gone by. And as long as he can go on stage and sing, he will do it. Because for him, music is not a job, not a business, but a life. After surgery and a long recovery, Jon Bon Jovi was finally starting to feel better. He realized that his voice would never be the same again, but that didn't mean he was ready to give up. Music was his life. And even if he had to relearn how to sing, find new techniques, control his breathing, and adapt to his limitations, he saw no other way for him. But while his physical recovery could be measured, his emotional and psychological recovery remained in question. After news of his illness, fans were divided. Some supported him, saying that he had already given more to this world than anyone could expect and had every right to rest. Others, on the contrary, demanded proof that he could still perform. The internet was filled with arguments. Should Jon retire from the stage or fight on? There were many comments from people who didn't understand the issue, accusing him of just getting old and trying to keep afloat. For a man who had been on top all his life, seeing such discussions was painful. But the hardest blow was not the comments, but his own doubts. One day, while rehearsing in front of the camera to look at himself from the sidelines, he suddenly saw something he hadn't noticed before. His face when he sang no longer expressed the confidence it always had. He no longer looked like a man ready to blow up the stadium. He looked tired, even broken. This footage made him wonder for a moment. Maybe it really was time to leave. However, he knew he couldn't just disappear. Even if he decided not to perform anymore, he wanted to leave behind something important, something that would prove that he was still the Jon Bon Jovi that millions remembered. And that project was the new album Forever. Working on the album was not easy. Vocals had to be recorded intermittently, as the voice was getting tired quickly. He hired the best specialists who helped him to build the sound, so that his vocal peculiarities would be an advantage and not a weakness. Some songs had to be completely rewritten several times because he couldn't achieve the emotional depth he needed. At one point, he even considered bringing in a young vocalist to back him up, but quickly dismissed the idea. If he couldn't do his own songs, then there shouldn't be any. When the album was almost finished, the hard part began, his first live performance after the surgery. He knew it would be the moment of truth. He needed to get on stage and prove, first and foremost to himself, that he could still be an artist. In the audience sat friends, family, colleagues, label representatives, and most importantly, fans who were waiting for his return. The first few minutes passed in absolute tension. He could feel the sweat running down his back, his fingers trembling slightly, and his voice sounding different from what he was used to. But then he saw people singing along with him. They knew every word, every note. At that moment, he realized it didn't matter how much his voice had changed, as long as he could still make people feel. After the performance, the internet started discussing him again. Some praised him for his courage, some said he should stop, but it didn't matter to him anymore. He knew he had done his best and would continue to do so as long as he had any strength left. But the most interesting thing happened later. After the success of the album, young musicians started coming to him, asking for advice. They said that his struggles had inspired them, that they too were facing problems and didn't know how to deal with them. Suddenly, Jon realized that his story wasn't just about music. It's about embracing change, about not being afraid to lose what once defined you. In recent months, he's been thinking more and more about the future. He doesn't want to just disappear, but he doesn't want to become a shadow of himself either. He still writes songs, but he does it differently now, without pressure, without feeling like he has to prove anything to anyone. He started thinking about helping young artists, being a mentor, passing on his experience. And that brings him a new sense of joy that he hasn't felt in years. Yes, he's no longer the guy running around the stage with a microphone like he was in the 80s, but he's still Jon Bon Jovi. And as long as he has a voice, even if it's changed, he'll keep singing. Because for him, music isn't just a job, it's his life.